Every week a little group of Africans meet in St. Peter Claver's parish in Nairobi. After the meeting they set out in pairs through the streets of the city on their way to visit one of the African housing schemes. No one takes much notice of them as they pass, for the members of the Legion of Mary are a familiar sight in St. Peter Claver's parish. This, after all, is the parish where the Legion first took root in East Africa, planted by a young Irish girl who had been told by her doctors that she had just 1 year to live. Edel Quinn was born on the 14th of September in the year 1907. Her birthplace was a little country house near Canturk in County Cork. Her father was a bank official, and during her childhood she and the 4 younger members of the family were to move with him to several different Irish towns, according as he was transferred from one branch of the bank to another. It was inevitably a somewhat unsettled way of life, but finally, when Edel was 17, the family came to Dublin and settled in Trafalgar Square, Monkstown. Edel, the eldest child, was looked up to by her younger sisters, but they saw nothing extraordinary about her at that time.
Well, we didn't really think anything. She was one. She was the eldest of 5 of us. There was 4 girls and 1 boy. And she was the eldest, and she more or less acted as the eldest girl. She looked after us all and our interests and everything. But we noticed no difference at all in her. Beyond that, she used to go to Mass every morning and go to all these Masses on Sunday. And she'd read holy books. But beyond that, we never thought anything more about her at all. I mean, she was very good at games, very keen on swimming, but it didn't agree with her swimming. She got too cold. And then she was very keen on tennis, which she used to play up in Corinda Park in Dunleary. And she was keen on walking. And she was keen on golf.
Well, we always thought her as an ordinary person. It was only afterwards that we realised all this sort of was going on. But I mean, we only thought it took her that she went out for the Legion. We didn't realise all this holiness was there. We always knew she was very interested in the Mass. That was her whole sort of life. Always going to Mass. We couldn't understand it. One a day was enough, we thought.
To her other friends, Edel seemed equally normal, always cheerful and light-hearted, but there were occasions when a more serious side showed up.
We were going, I can place the spot actually around by Burgh Quay, just chatting, and I said to her, we were talking as always. She always managed to talk about God, and we argued about different things, and particularly about the Legion and praying through Our Lady, and I always said I like to go direct. But anyhow, this day I said to her, oh well, Edel, so far as I can see it, one day you give up one thing, another day another, and the next another, until you have nothing left. And she said, you're beginning to get the idea, Joe, with her funny little smile. But it was the way she said it that I remember it all the time.
At this time, the Legion of Mary was still in its infancy. It had been started by a Dublin layman, Frank Duff, a few years before in Myra House, and hadn't yet spread beyond the city itself. One branch of the Legion had its meeting place in Gardiner's Row, and it had among its members a girl called Mona Tierney, whose parents had been friends of the Quinn family.
Well, I joined the Legion through being in a Children of Mary sodality. I heard about the Legion and I thought I'd like to join it. And strange to say that when it was at Children of Mary sodality that I met Edel, and she invited me to visit her, and I told her about my Legion meeting, which happened to be on that evening. So she said she'd like to join the Legion, asked me would I bring her along. So I feel that Our Lady's hand was in it.
The Legion was just starting in 25, and Edel joined, I think, 26. It wasn't well known as it started only in a very, very small way. And we really didn't know what was going on. I went around with her a couple of times. It didn't appeal to me very much, really. I felt too sad for the poor girls myself. She used to bring me up to Regina Cheli and play the piano there for the girls to dance. But I didn't like the work. It didn't appeal to me at all. But she loved it simply, loved it.
Edel took to the Legion and its work as a fish takes to water. She soon began to spend all her free time in the slums and docklands of the city, occupying herself in street rescue work and in visiting tenements and cheap lodging houses. But a new resolution was forming in her mind, and she wrote secretly to a Poor Clare convent in Belfast, asking to be admitted as a postulant.
Adele and I used to meet in Roberts generally, when we were going up to Loretta Social Club. That was where she founded Loretta Social Club with me. And we'd have tea. So one evening she told me that she intended entering the Poor Clares. I was disgusted. I said, why couldn't she try some normal order where I could see her now and again? You see, I said, it's a horrible thing for you to do. I'll pray you don't go in. So, of course, I didn't really mean that. But then she was going to Belfast. So some time afterwards, now I couldn't at this stage place the exact interval, but some time after that, we were coming from the club one evening. It was in 6 Gardeners Row, and we were walking down towards Venata's Church across the road, and I still can get the awful feeling when she said, "Joe, you've had your way. I'm not going into the Poor Clares." I was going to say I'm delighted, but I realised there was something else behind it. And she said, "No, I've had a hemorrhage. I'm going out to Newcastle instead." So, I felt desolate. But I was amazed the way she took it. It was just all God's will. And yet her very heart was in going into the Poor Clares, but she just brushed it aside because it was what God wanted. And that was the way it was with her always.
The sanatorium in Newcastle, County Wicklow, was to be Edel's home for the next 18 months. The only known treatment for tuberculosis at that time was fresh air and rest, and Edel had plenty of both. But years of overwork and undernourishment had so undermined her health that any improvement in her condition was only temporary.
Well, I used to go down to her every Sunday there, and I never saw her in bed there at all. She wouldn't stay in bed. The nurses said she just wouldn't stay because she used to go around the wards helping them. And there was a lot of work. There was shorter staff there at the time, and she used to go around helping. I can never remember her being ill beyond the first night, because I used to sleep in the room with her, and that was the only night she was ever ill. So one Sunday before, I think it was a fortnight before Christmas, I went down as usual to see her, and she said, "I'm coming home." I said, "You're not, your mummy's not expecting." She said, "Yes, I'm coming home." She said, "I can do far more good at home," she said, "than I can do down here." She said, "I'm only wasting my time down here." So she came back that evening, the bus, and the family got a terrible shock when they saw her coming back. But she came came without the advice of the doctor. He said, "You do it on your own thing." But nothing happened to her afterwards. I mean, she was all right, really. And she would have been all right, really, only for she wouldn't give herself a chance. She got home and she started off again, out to Mass in the morning, back again, and then she took up a job. She was in that since she left for Africa.
Edel herself knew by this time that her disease could not be cured, and her only desire was to use the time remaining in the best possible way.
I was very upset when she told me she was going to Africa, and I tried to dissuade her. So she said, "Oh, the doctor tells me that if I stayed at home and lived a quiet, easy life, I might have 5 years to live. But of course, if I go to Africa, I wouldn't have a year." So I said, "Well, that's wrong. I consider that wrong, Adele, because that's suicide. You're going against the doctor's orders." And she said, "Oh, no, 1 year spent in the service of God is better than 5 at home." But God gave her the 5 years in Africa after all.
At the back of the Legion headquarters, there is a dilapidated hall, and here was held the meeting that was to decide Edel's fate. Many felt that it was madness to send so delicate a girl on such a mission, and their objections were strongly urged by the influential Carmelite, Father McGuinness. Frank Duff remembers the scene very vividly.
Dr. McGuinness had an overwhelming sense of humour. And it was his undoing in this particular case, because after he'd been speaking very vehemently for a while, he positively ran out of breath, and he stopped for a moment. And at this stage, the little lady rose up and said that all these difficulties referred to by Dr. McGuinness had been elaborately explained to her, that there was no effort whatever made to minimize her task, and that that's what she wanted. She wanted a difficult assignment. And then she said the celebrated phrase, "I don't want to be sent off on any picnic." So there was a laugh at this, which was vitally important because it relieved a supercharged atmosphere. And then Dr. McGuinness's sense of humour destroyed him because he used the first breath that came to him to issue a bellow like a bull and to say, "Picnic! Picnic!" He says, "You'll be a picnic for somebody." So the whole place dissolved into merriment, and that's what was wanted. That's sanity returned to the picture.
The Quinns were now living in a smaller house in Monkstown, and it was from here that Edel was to leave for Africa. She was not looking forward to the prospect of saying goodbye to her family, and especially to her mother, whom she knew she'd never see again.
I mean, she was to go away at, I think it was 8 o'clock at night, and she went away all that day. We never saw her. And she had nothing packed. Mommy had everything ready for her. But she had nothing packed. She had her case just in the room, and the clothes were on the bed, and she had nothing ready at all. Somebody was calling for a 7:45, and she still hadn't arrived. She arrived in at 7:50 at a terrible gallop, charged up the stairs, packed all her clothes in a hurry, and was out by 8:15. She did that so she wouldn't hurt any of us. And it wouldn't feel, and it was a dreadful night going. It was really very hard. The rain, and it was very, very rough crossing. So she stayed in, I think Liverpool wasn't, for about two nights there. And I rang her up on Saturday night to say goodbye to her on the phone. And it was, of course, she was tears. Very sad she was, really going away. But once she got away, I think she was quite happy.
The long sea journey through the Mediterranean and the Red Sea was to provide Edel with her first opportunity to rest for many months. At Aden, she was photographed looking very happy in a sun helmet. Then on to the great port of Mombasa, where she left the ship and continued on by train to Nairobi, the capital of Kenya, which was to be her base and headquarters for the next 7.5 years. She was invited to stay at St. Teresa's Convent, Eastleigh. She was barely settled in before she set about calling a meeting to establish the Legion.
And there were quite a number of people turned up, perhaps about 50. And she explained all the works of the Legion, and that she would, in order to start her First Presidium in Nairobi, she would have to have 4 members to open the meeting. I happened to be one of the members, and to my great surprise there were only 4 of us put our names down. Everybody else seemed to just walk out of the meeting, after the meeting was finished. But she was very happy about it. We 4 of us putting our name down and promising to attend the First Presidium in Nairobi the following week.
The First Presidium was for Europeans, and it held its first meeting on the 7th of December 1936. The following Sunday saw the first meeting of an African Presidium, and many others were to follow in Nairobi and in the surrounding missions during the next few months. As the work progressed, Edel began to travel further and further afield, travelling as best she could in a wide variety of cars and lorries and in all kinds of climatic conditions.
Normally she travelled by native bus or transport, whatever it was, oftentimes a lorry. If there happened to be a car on the mission when she wanted to get to another mission, well, usually the car took her to the place, but that didn't always happen. She usually had to rely upon whatever means she could get, and that oftentimes was very poor transport, an ordinary lorry with a few seats in it or something like that, and the roads, of course, were very bad. If it was during the rains, there were a quagmire, and during the fine weather, you had nothing, only dust blowing around, and usually you had hardly recognise the person when you had to get out of this, covered over with a sort of a brown dust.
Eventually, Edel succeeded in buying herself a car, a battered old coupe, which she always described as her Rolls Royce. She also acquired a driver whom she named Ali Baba, and who was to be her faithful companion and protector during many long journeys. Her carefully kept petrol accounts give some idea of the distances covered, though not of the adventures that happened on the way.
She had a very bad old Rolls Royce of a car, and she had a driver, Nally was his name, Ala I think was his name, and he was always getting drunk. She had an awful job trying to keep him anyway. This day they went out miles out in the bush. I think she was visiting one of these missionary convents, And then they found this poor man. He was dead, of course, and they don't bury them out there. They just throw them there to rot. He was a Christian, so she put him in the back of the car, but the car was a closed car. And, of course, as soon as they got they had 100 miles to go in the car. I think there was a priest with her at the time that came with the body and the driver. And, of course, the lions, once they got the smell of death, they heard, and they came trained. You could hear them in the distance all the time. And all they were praying, storming heaven, that the car wouldn't break down. They just made it.
Edel's letters to her family and her friends describe many other picturesque incidents, and also enclosed some of the snapshots that she took during the course of her travels. She journeyed all over Kenya, Uganda, Tanganyika and Malawi, and she also voyaged to the islands of Zanzibar and Mauritius in the Indian Ocean. Everywhere she went, she took photographs of interesting scenes and people, and these are some of them that were found after she died. And everywhere she left behind a network of legionaries, dedicated lay apostles, who would give invaluable help to the missionaries in their work of preaching the gospel.
She was quite irresistible. She went to missionaries who did not believe in the possibility of such a thing. They were only too painfully aware of the weaknesses in the human material which they were working on. And they did not see that out of that you could elicit apostolic quality. Now, Edel had only to have an interview with the most doubting one among them, and she brought him to the point of being willing to give the thing a trial. Now, that applied elsewhere than to the missionaries. It applied in all the convents where she went, many of which she stayed. Every one of them had the same sort of cry about her. The Carmelites, for instance, of Nairobi, declared that her visits to their Carmel were like the visits of an angel, leaving a perceptible atmosphere behind.
The distances she covered would have been formidable for a healthy man. For a girl gradually dying from an incurable disease, they were little short of miraculous.
First I knew of her arrival was that some boy had come up, he was going home from school, and he told me that there was a European down at the bottom of the hill, looking very exhausted and tired. And so I didn't know who she was, and suspected all right that it was Edel Quinn. And I went down, and I met her halfway up the hill, and she was very exhausted at times, so I asked her to sit down, but she wouldn't sit down. She insisted upon proceeding up to the top of the hill, and then I wanted her to come in and have a cup of tea for me. And she wouldn't. She wanted to know when was the Legion meeting starting. I said we start in about 10 minutes or so, and we went over to the meeting then, and she sat out the whole of the meeting. Well, she was able to attend the meetings all right, but at night time especially you could hear her coughing, and where she was sleeping was only a small distance away, and you could hear her coughing practically the whole night long. But that didn't stop her from getting up in the morning and being at Mass. And another thing she used to do was when the church was free in the evening time especially, she would go over to the chapel and stay there for quite a while. And I noticed that the book that she used, and most of the time that she was in the chapel for reading and so on, was the Handbook of the Legion.
Edel's loyalty to the Handbook and to the Legion system was quite unshakable, and those who suggested alternatives to her found themselves in hot water.
You see, she stayed quite a lot in Nairobi, and I suppose she paid more attention, or at least she visited the Presidia in Nairobi probably more than anywhere else, and therefore I used to come in contact with her, and I had a lot of problems because my idea was to try and get the Africans to, through the Legion, to do mission work. And of course she always insisted that the rule book, the Legion Handbook, should be strictly observed. And I used to put up different problems to her that, well, a lot of these things were for people in Ireland, and out in Africa we were completely different set up, and the work was different, and some of them should be changed. But she continually refused to make any changes. Even, I think she refused even to send my suggestions to Dublin.
As her health continued to deteriorate, her friends persuaded her to go to hospital in South Africa, but she dragged herself back to Nairobi more dead than alive and set out on one more missionary journey, her last.
I pleaded with her to stay quietly for at least another week, and if Father Doody couldn't take her, then to be satisfied that she couldn't go. But she was so adamant that I had to promise her I would come down. I couldn't let her go in a taxi. I came down the following morning, and we left in the car for Limuru on her way to Kisumu, and she was so ill and looking so awfully frail and beside me in the car that on the way I said to her, look, what on earth is going to happen if you get a bad turn in the train? And she very quickly replied, I'm not going to get a bad turn in the train. Our Lady will look after me. We arrived at Limuru, the mission, Catholic mission Limuru, and Father Reedy gave us an excellent lunch, and I was so worried and worn that I could have slept for the remainder of the afternoon, but not Edel. She remained wide awake, afraid that she would miss the time, and then we left with Father Reedy for Limuru station, and she was wearied on the platform to such an extent that she sat down on our little suitcase. He had been trying to persuade her not to make the journey, the long train journey. There she got up then when the train came in and went into the carriage and came to the window, and you'd think she was going off on her honeymoon. She was so happy and waved to us all. Now, we all know that that was her last trip she was able to do. She stayed there, I think, 5 weeks or so, and when she came back, she was soon after she died.
When she returned to Nairobi, it was obvious that the end was near. But she refused to stay in bed, and each afternoon she'd sit in the convent garden, writing and praying and making plans.
She had come back from one of these long journeys, and she was really exhausted. I think it was up in Kisumu direction she was. But she was really exhausted and looked very ill. And the mother got her to stay in bed for a little while, a few days. But she always wanted to be up and about, and she always wanted to be working. And she's often said that she came out to Africa to extend the Legion, and therefore she had to do everything possible to extend it. And she said she couldn't extend it in bed. So she, after 3 or 4 days that time, she did revive somewhat, and then one evening she was sitting out, and actually the end came very suddenly. I was sent for, and I arrived there, and she was still conscious and fully alert when I got to her, and I think she was rather surprised, really, to that I was going to ask her to receive the last sacraments. Anyway, I remember when I did ask her, she gave me a very nice smile, and in spite of the fact that her and I didn't get on so very well together, and I probably was hardly the priest of her choice to administer the last sacraments to her. But then afterwards, after receiving the last sacrament, she got very weak, and I had to carry her into her room, and she just remained in agony for about maybe 5 minutes. I remember her saying that she was suffering very, very great pain, and then almost immediately she died.
The room where Edel died is used today as a meeting place for the Legion of Mary. There are candles and flowers before the statue of Our Lady, and the prayers that she loved so much are still said. Her work didn't die with her, but has flourished and expanded throughout the mission territories of East Africa. Her life story has been told in many languages and read throughout the world. Even in purely natural terms, it was quite an achievement for a girl who was given just 1 year to live.
Edel Quinn lies buried here in this graveyard at the Holy Ghost Fathers in Nairobi. At first sight, it looks quite like an Irish graveyard. Green grass grows around her grave, soft rain falls on it, and tall trees overshadow it. But the soil which covers her is African soil, and the sky at night is lit by the glow of the Southern Cross. Edel never forgot her native Ireland, never ceased to love it. But it was to Africa that she'd given the finest years of her life, and so it's fitting that her body should rest, finally, in African soil. She herself wouldn't have wanted it any other way.